Namaste and welcome viewers. You're watching Business at 9 with me, Ashish Parekh. India has retained its spot as the largest source of international students in the US for the second consecutive year. A total of 3,63,019 Indian students were studying in the United States in 2024-25, which is an increase of nearly 10% on a YOY basis. On the other hand, Chinese students in the US declined by 4% in the same period. Now, additionally, the overall number of new international students in the US has also declined by 5% for the first time. But going forward, given President Trump's policy, uncertainties are also taking into account his past actions to curb federal funding to some universities. How is the trend of international students likely going to change forward? That's, of course, the big question that's there on the broadcast. Joining us right now, Rajkamal Rao, Managing Director of Rao Advisors LLC and op-ed columnist. Shantanu Rooj, founder and CEO of Team Lee's EdTech. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. A very interesting debate lined up yet again revolving around Trump, his policies, and also, more importantly, the uncertainties around his actions. Mr. Rao, let's start with you now. The headline number is impressive for sure. 3.6 lakh Indian students in 2024-25, up by 9.5%. But interestingly, at the same time, new international enrollments are down a steep 17% for fall 2025. How do you explain this widening gap and also a contradiction when it comes to overall student numbers and the Indian students?
Hi, thank you for having me again. This is not news to me. Going back to 2012, when I began counseling students, India has always been the first or second or third, generally the first two source countries for foreign students. I'm going to go so far as to say that if every other country began to drop, India would always pick up the slack. The aspirations for the average Indian student to go to the US to earn a degree and then, potentially get an OPT visa, get some training, then maybe get an H-1B and kind of immigrate. That desire, that aspiration starts very young, and then the Indian government has also made it expressly clear that that is the official Indian government policy as well. Colleges and universities love this, love Indians coming there. It's a $45 billion export market. So everything is aligned, and India will always be there to take up the slack.
Absolutely. And the other question that also arises is what exactly are Indian students trying to do with all of this education? And for example, Mr. Rooj, OPT enrollment has surged 47% from 97,500 to 1.44 lakh, which accounts for more than a third of all Indian students. Are students now increasingly treating US education as a work migration pathway rather than an academic pursuit?
Ashish, that may not be true at this point in time. Too early to make that inference at this point. So if you look at it overall, there is all of us are understanding the fact that because of geopolitical situations today, there is a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of visa problems, visa hassles. There are the immigration ecosystem there is not very friendly. The campus environment is not very friendly. It's scary at times. There's a lot of fear among students, right? So, and most importantly, the post-study work opportunities are almost non-existent today. I mean, that's what Trump has been talking about all this while. I think because of all of these together, there is a concern amongst parents to send their kids to the US. I think that's definitely a challenge. We'll continue to see this challenge for the next few years' time till the time Mr. Trump doesn't decide to change this policy forever, because this uncertainty is actually killing a lot of people. What I also noticed is that this specific report that you're talking about currently, we also noticed that in the undergrad segment, there has been a slight increase, whereas the postgrad segment, there has been a significant decrease. In India, for example, most of the dream of the US education dream is seeded into students early on in their life. The flourishing of the international schools in the country ultimately end up in sending the students largely to the US market. That's the way it is built up. So all these kids who study from the IBDP or IGCSE schools, large part of them aspire to study in the US universities. it's very difficult to change those aspirations overnight. And if a kid has studied in this international schools for 11 years, 12 years together, immediately changing that becomes difficult. So I think that momentum continues as some kids continue to try to go to the US in spite of non-friendly atmosphere. But as we go forward, I think we are seeing growing interest amongst Indian students to study in different some other countries also, and consider other locales for their options there. I think that's something that's changing overall, and that trend is going to continue for a few more years, Ashish.
Absolutely. Mr. Ruj, interesting that you talk about visa there. I'll take this point across to Mr. Rao. Mr. Rao, visa certainly appears to be the biggest disruptor. The fact that there's a lot of uncertainty around it. The report says that 96% of US institutions cite visa concerns, and F visas particularly issued to Indians fell 33.2% in fiscal year 2024. Is this now the single largest threat to India's student pipeline?
So I think the single largest threat to India's pipeline, to be honest with you, is the threat of students being able to work after they graduate. I think, I mean, to your point earlier, I think so let us just take an extreme case. Let us suppose that the OPT and the STEM OPT options are completely cut off. It's a silly argument, but let's suppose that happens. I'll bet you that the Indian student enrollment in the US will drop by more than half. So the main magnetic driver for Indian students to go to the US really is the opportunity for them to work for a couple of years, pay back their loans, and potentially try to jumpstart their career in the US. So going to a university is simply a stepping stone for for what they perceive to be a brighter life abroad. If you take away that nexus, I think the American attractiveness as a destination for higher education goes dramatically down. This is also true, and I completely agree with with your other guest that I noticed that too. The undergrad, the undergrad numbers are looking better compared to grad school. And that is probably because the people who send their undergrad students, the families that send their undergrad students, are probably relatively more wealthy. These are families that have been able to absorb, the cost of IB education or IGCSE education compared to state education. And so they're relatively more wealthy. And even if there is a turnaround in the OPT prospects for these kids, they're probably willing to weather it. Maybe they have businesses. But if you look at the large number of grad students that go there, many of them are relatively middle class. They go to SBI or wherever, whichever bank, and they try to get a loan and they have to pay it back. So the thing is, the employment opportunities are integral to the attractiveness of a destination such as the US.
Absolutely. In fact, let's move away from that data, which without a doubt is interesting. It's a pattern that seems to be developing over the last few years now. Mr. Ruj, now international students form only 6% of US higher ed, but 60% of these institutions have already highlighted the financial contributions of such students. If now the new enrollments, the pattern that we're looking at, continue to fall, do you expect US universities to now start pushing for some sort of a policy easing, or are they ready to brace for a financial strain?
Ashish, my sincere belief is that if the situation doesn't change, and if countries like India and China stop sending their students to the US, a large number of US universities will look at bankruptcy. If you look at the private universities in the US, which are not state funded, most of them survive because of international students. And there's going to be a huge problem in case these international students do not come in. And apart from economic and financial reasons, look at the other benefits all these international students bring into the campus, the type of diversity in the ecosystem that comes out. Even, for example, look at the staff staffing, for example, all the research associates and all the work that happens inside the campus are all assisted by large part of these international students who take these additional roles to make sure that they can subsidize their course fees. I think some of these ecosystems, some of these equilibriums will start changing the way if this becomes a norm in terms of making sure that is unfriendly for international students. I think it's going to be a big trouble. And look at the the local US students loans. So 1.7 trillion dollars is actually at the risk of becoming default in the next couple of years' time. I think US is looking at staring at a massive problem in case this doesn't turn around back.
Right. I'll take that point across to Mr. Rao. Mr. Rao, what's your statement? Mr. Ruj here, of course, made a very interesting statement. He's saying that if students from India and China stop going to the US to study, a lot of these universities will actually go bankrupt. Do you agree with that statement, or do you think it does indicate the importance of all of these students? But again, a notion that they might go bankrupt is a little too far-fetched.
No, I would actually agree that many of the universities would go bankrupt. But to be honest with you, I'm not going to shed any tears that these universities will go bankrupt. Many of the universities are nothing more than diploma mills. If these universities had been in any country other than the US, let's suppose these universities were in Jamaica or in, I don't know, some other country, I don't think anybody would go there. So the reason that these universities exist is that I'm talking about many of these private schools. They exist because they function as a place where they can issue the I-20. They can issue they have an international student advisor on board, so they can file paperwork for the OPT visa. So that's what I'm saying. So the thing is that when we talk about private universities, let us be clear. The top schools, right, the Columbias, the Ivy Leagues, the Carnegie Mellons, the MITs, these schools are never in trouble, right? They say that they're in trouble, but they're not really in trouble. But the point is that there will always be sufficient students that will take up the slack. Now, these universities are definitely reliant on the international student because the international student pays top dollar, and that money that comes in subsidizes the fees for the locals that attend these schools. In that sense, yes, you're right. But I'm concerned more about the other schools, even some state schools that are so reliant today on foreign enrollment that they probably will shut down, or at least they will shut down some programs. This is already, by the way, happening, right? The money that comes in from international students goes and subsidizes some liberal arts programs, and if student enrollment drops, those liberal arts programs will have to shut down. That is the first step. And you're right, as Mr. Jha says, it is possible that entire universities or colleges will declare bankruptcy. I agree with you that will happen.
All right. Mr. Ruj, once again, let's shed light on some of the data that we're looking at here. The top countries with international students in the US, India, China, South Korea. Now, India, the number of enrollments in number of students up by 10%. China and South Korea, both number 2 and number 3, both down by 4 and 2% respectively. What are these countries doing different that India is not doing? Are they now, do they have better universities now? Are they able to retain their talent more? What's happening? Help us understand this pattern.
Ashish, you are actually right. Some of these countries have started investing in their own education system, and China's higher education system today is much, much better, much, much more stable than what it used to be. And there is a constant effort, constant push by the government to ensure that students study locally and they are retained locally as talent, because as you send students to the US, you also as a country have the risk of losing those talent to a foreign country. Those kids have a risk of settling there and becoming a part of the US talent workforce. I mean, so in terms of inward movement of talent, some of these countries are actually making efforts and investing in those infrastructure to ensure that they can retain the students in their own countries. China and Korea, I think the ones that you talked about are great examples there. even in India today, there has been a lot of efforts by the government now to create the right ecosystem, right environment in this country to retain a lot of talents. I mean, in terms of improvement of the quality of infrastructure, quality of education in the country, the quality of universities that you see, opening more IITs, the flourishing of the IIM that you see, internationalization of education, allowing foreign universities to set up campuses in the country, are all an effort by the government to ensure that we can arrest some part of this exodus of great talent that happens from the country. I think China and Korea are slightly ahead of the curve in this particular space. We'll start seeing this happening in India as well.
Absolutely. In fact, India does definitely have a lot of catching up to do. And like Mr. Rao said, we need to start focusing on investing on education a lot. And the biggest problem, like he mentioned, for the Indian student pipeline in the US is the fact that they're not able to find jobs after they graduate. And with Trump's policies now, hire Americans first, it becomes even more difficult for a lot of these students to find jobs. Will that make any difference to these numbers? We'll, of course, have to wait for the next report to come out. But Mr. Rao and Mr. Rooj, really appreciate you joining us, helping us understand this pattern and read in between the lines. And viewers, on that note, it's time for a short break. We'll be right back.